The Nuclear Waste Management Organization is in the midst of a wide-ranging dialogue with Canadians to develop a recommendation for the long-term management of the country's used nuclear fuel. The organization, established by nuclear electricity generators in 2002, has committed to putting forward a plan that is socially acceptable, environmentally responsible, technically sound, and economically feasible. It will propose its recommendations to the Government of Canada in November 2005. I'm Stephanie Brochard with an update on what the NWMO has learned from citizens and experts in the first half of its study. In the next few minutes, we'll see what some of the long-term nuclear waste management options might look like. We'll learn about the framework that's being proposed to compare them. And we'll hear some of the strengths and limitations that were identified when a diverse group of experts applied the framework in a preliminary comparison of the options. First, some background. Canada began using nuclear energy to generate electricity in a significant way when the first two units of the Pickering Station in Ontario were brought online in 1971. Since then, installed nuclear capacity has risen to 15,000 megawatts in 3 provinces. Even with 5 of its 20 reactors not currently operating, nuclear accounts for as much as 35% of Ontario's electricity. 1 reactor supplies New Brunswick with 30% of its power, and another meets 2.5% of Quebec's needs. Nuclear reactors are powered by uranium, formed into pellets, and assembled into fuel bundles. Each of these generates enough electricity to power 100 homes for a year. When they are removed from a reactor, the bundles are highly radioactive and have to be carefully managed for a very long time. They are placed in water-filled pools to cool and shield them for 7 to 10 years. Then they are transferred to dry storage in casks or concrete vaults or silos. These are interim storage facilities and are not meant to be permanent. All of them are at the nuclear plants where the used fuel is produced. And all are licensed and regulated by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, which ensures that all used fuel in Canada is fully accounted for and safely stored. Right now, there are about 1.8 million used bundles in interim wet or dry storage. 3.6 million will be produced over the expected lifespan of our existing nuclear plants. A quantity of used fuel is also stored at Atomic Energy of Canada's test and research facilities in Manitoba, Quebec, and Ontario, and much smaller amounts occur at university research reactors. Like most other nuclear countries, Canada has not yet adopted a plan for managing its used fuel over the very long time that it will remain hazardous, beyond the current period of interim management. Early in its study, the NWMO initiated a series of conversations and other engagement activities with citizens and experts to understand what Canadians expect in an acceptable long-term used fuel management strategy. 10 key questions emerged and were reported in the first NWMO discussion document, Asking the Right Questions. It was clear that although people consider scientific and technical factors critical, social and ethical concerns are just as important and must be part of any decision-making on the issue. These considerations are value-based, and as Elizabeth Dowdeswell, president of the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, explains, they don't have right or wrong answers.
We have to recognize that the answers we're seeking will not come solely from physicists, industry, or government representatives. All of us as citizens have a role to play. Experts alone can't tell us what risks are acceptable to us, what's the responsibility of this generation, or what institutions are actually going to inspire trust and confidence. Experts can't decide for us how we feel about the inevitable trade-offs between absolute security or keeping the waste accessible. No one has a monopoly on the correct answers, and everyone's values are important.
To better understand the values Canadians expect should govern decisions about nuclear waste management, the NWMO sponsored a National Citizens Dialogue. 500 people in 12 communities were asked to think about nuclear waste and explore some of the tough choices that have to be made. Not surprisingly, they concluded safety and security are overriding requirements for any plan. They also identified 6 guiding values.
The idea that we could make the wrong decision is possible, but that's not really an excuse to not make a decision. We felt that we have to do something now, and the process has to begin now, rather than in 5 or 10 or 15 years.
The spent fuel rods represent some natural resource that may be very valuable in the future. So one thing to consider is not to remove the possibility of ever using it to future generations that may be smarter than we are.
There was a very strong voice for exploration of alternative power sources and reducing the amount of bundles that are produced.
Government must continue to enforce safety regulations, oversee industry standards, and site management. It goes without saying, that's what they're there for, to look after us, and they simply must continue to do that.
Making sure that the public did get information and that it was part of the education process for future generations as well. And I think that's a critical issue that has to be addressed by the decision makers.
It should really be a combination of different voices and ideas. So scientists, geologists, and the average citizens make recommendations, but ultimately it's the federal government that makes the decision, with the understanding that the federal government is voted in by the public.
In addition to Canadian values, the NWMO is factoring ethical considerations into its analysis. An ethics roundtable has provided 6 principles to guide the assessment. There must be sensitivity to the different values people bring to the dialogue. Life in all its forms must be respected, as must all future life, and all peoples and cultures. There must be justice across all groups, regions, and generations, and there must be fairness for everyone affected, particularly minorities and marginalized groups. Armed with these ethical principles and the values expressed by Canadians, the NWMO assembled an assessment team and asked them to do a preliminary comparison of long-term nuclear waste management approaches. William Lease, former president of the Royal Society of Canada and an officer of the Order of Canada, was a member.
What's important about what we're doing now and that we've never done before is that we're considering a set of options, and in doing so in a fully transparent manner. And you say, why should we do that? Because in the end we'll have more confidence in the results if we've been thinking about not just what's possible to do, but what's better or preferable to do. When you do that, however, you find that any option you consider is going to have a mix of good points and bad points. There's no perfect solution. The process that you go through in deciding how to do that trade-off must be as transparent as possible so that everyone can see all the steps in the reasoning that you've used.
Basing its work on the direction provided by Canadians, the assessment team identified 8 objectives for an acceptable approach to the long-term management of used nuclear fuel. It has to be fair in the way costs, benefits, and risks are distributed. Public health cannot be threatened, and safety must be ensured. The same for worker health and safety, both during the construction and operational phases. Communities must not be adversely affected environmentally, economically, or socially. Security must be maintained, as must environmental integrity. There must be enough money available to pay for the selected approach, and whatever approach is chosen must be adaptable to take advantage of new technologies or changing societal expectations. As we've said, all of Canada's used nuclear fuel is stored at the reactor sites where it is produced. One of the long-term options the NWMO must study, and which the assessment team compared with others, is the idea of extending those arrangements indefinitely. Leave it where it is. New storage facilities would have to be built at each of the 7 sites, either above ground or just below surface. Conceptual designs have been prepared using both existing and new technology. Casks, vaults, or silos could be used depending on current practices at each facility. In all cases, all of the storage components would have to be completely refurbished and the fuel repackaged every 300 years. Depending on the design chosen, costs for extended reactor site storage would range from $17.6 to $25.7 billion. Like every approach, there are advantages and limitations.
Permanent on-site storage is the easiest option to think about in a way. We just have to leave it where it is. There's no transportation to some other location, and we're already monitoring this stuff all the time, so it's easy to just carry on monitoring and checking on it. But then you have to ask yourself, is this fair to those who live in the vicinity of the OPG sites or at Pointe-le-Pro or Gentilly? None of those sites were designed for this purpose, that is long-term storage of used nuclear fuel. And obviously, if we do that, we'll have a whole bunch of sites, half a dozen or more. All of them have to be monitored carefully for a very long time, and the costs never stop.
Disposal is a way of isolating used nuclear fuel for all time. There is no intention of retrieval or reuse. The method most studied and being pursued in several countries is disposal in geological repositories deep below the ground's surface. All of the used fuel from all of the reactors would be transported to one location and placed 500 to 1,000 meters underground. Engineered containers made of copper and steel and the surrounding rock would act together with a stable surrounding geology to isolate the waste from the surface environment. Costs for a geological repository are estimated to be around $16.2 billion.
The deep geological repository, like every other option, has a mix of good and bad points. On the plus side, it offers the best combination of what we call multiple barriers. That is, a combination of natural barriers in the rock and the human-engineered barriers in how we design the chamber. This offers good environmental protection, and for the same reasons, it offers probably the best security of any option that we can think of. On the other hand, there's never a guarantee that something unforeseen won't happen down there deep in our deep underground chamber. This option forces us to rely on the testing we've done in the past and on the simulation studies that we'll carry out. And also, by putting the waste deep underground, we have in effect made a decision that we don't really intend to dig it up again for any reason whatsoever.
Centralized storage is a management option which would bring all of Canada's used fuel to one central site where it would always be monitored and accessible. Some proposals suggest above-ground storage, others below ground. Engineered barriers provide radiation protection. A variety of containers, vaults, or caverns could be used. They would require ongoing maintenance and would have to be changed or upgraded periodically. Buildings would also have to be replaced in regular cycles. Designs have been prepared for several centralized storage concepts. Depending on the method chosen, costs are estimated to be between $15.5 and $20 billion for the first 300-year cycle.
Centralized storage, as opposed to disposal, can be either above ground in buildings on the surface or in vaults shallow underground. The advantage here, similar to the deep repository, is that the facility will be purpose-built and thus will be suitable for nuclear fuel waste. The two options here, that is shallow underground or on the surface, illustrate the trade-off that has to be made. If you choose shallow underground, you reduce your security concerns, but on the other hand, you have to live with the lesser accessibility. On the other side, here as with the on-site storage option, the costs never end for our descendants. And also, like the deep repository option, we will have to transport the waste to the site. And that means we have to first find a location where communities in the vicinity are comfortable with our whole process.
The NWMO has much work ahead before it can make its recommendation to government. However, some things are becoming clear. Common ground is being found.
The voices of the public and the analysis of so-called experts actually find some convergence. There's no one perfect answer. At the same time, each group has expressed strong support for actually making a decision now so that the first concrete steps will be taken by this generation. They've also made very persuasive arguments that any approach should be adaptive or flexible, leaving open options to take advantage of new learning and new technology. Some call it a step-by-step approach. Consistently, we've heard that the process by which a method is implemented is going to be as important as the choice of method itself. A system of strong governance with extensive oversight and clear accountability is called for, as is the need for greater and continued opportunity for citizen involvement in decision-making. Canadians seem to have a great respect for society's technological progress to date, and they're quite optimistic about the future. They want to proceed in a way that will allow us to continue to benefit from evolving technical advances, and also to recognize that societal expectations may shift over time.
The NWMO is continuing its dialogue with interested Canadians. Everyone is welcome to help shape a plan for managing used nuclear fuel over the long term. If you have thoughts on the strengths and weaknesses of the options, if you have comments on how the NWMO proposes to compare them, if there are things you think must be built into an implementation plan, or if you have anything else to say about the NWMO study, we'd like to hear from you. Visit our website, send a letter, or give us a call.